morning sun cast golden rays through the banana leaves as Margaret made her way along the dusty path leading to Prophet Alexander's compound. The hem of her wrapper swept the red earth beneath her feet, matching the rhythm of her anxious heart. In her village of Ojusiri, nestled in the heart of West Africa, it was customary for young women to seek the Prophet's blessing before marriage, but Margaret's visit held a different purpose. At 25, she had watched all her friends transition into marriage, their compounds filled with the laughter of children, while she remained single despite her beauty and accomplishments. The Prophet's compound stood apart from the others, surrounded by tall Iroko trees, whose leaves whispered ancient secrets to those who knew how to listen. As Margaret approached, she could smell the familiar scent of burning herbs that always surrounded the old man's dwelling. Prophet Alexzander sat in his usual spot, a wooden stool carved with symbols of the ancestors, his white beard gleaming in the morning light. His eyes, though clouded with age, seemed to pierce through to her soul as she knelt before him in greeting. "My daughter," he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of generations, "I have been expecting you. The spirits have shown me your path." He reached for his sacred cowrie shells, casting them onto the mat before him. As they settled, a smile crossed his weathered face. "Your husband's name shall be Peter," he declared with certainty, "and your union will bring forth joy that will echo through generations." Little did Margaret know that this prophecy would set her on a journey that would test not only her heart, but also her wisdom in ways she could never have imagined. Margaret was the pride of her family. Born into a lineage of strong women, she had inherited her mother's beauty and her father's wisdom. Her skin glowed like polished mahogany, and her laughter was said to bring life to even the dullest gatherings. But it wasn't just her looks that made her stand out. Margaret was a skilled weaver, her hands creating intricate patterns that were sought after in neighboring villages. She was also known for her kindness, often helping the elderly and mentoring young girls in her community. Despite her many virtues, Margaret's heart was heavy. She had been courted by many suitors over the years, but none had felt right. Some were too boastful, others too timid, and a few simply didn't share her vision for the future. Her parents, though supportive, had begun to worry. "Margaret," her mother would say, "you are not getting any younger. The right man will not fall from the sky." But Margaret had always believed in destiny. She trusted that when the time was right, her true love would find her. And now, with the Prophet's words echoing in her mind, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Somewhere out there, Peter was waiting for her. It was a market day when Margaret first met the first Peter. The village square was alive with the hum of voices, the clinking of coins, and the aroma of roasted plantains. Margaret was busy haggling over a basket of yams when she heard a commotion nearby. A young boy had fallen and scraped his knee, and a man was tending to him with the precision of someone who knew what he was doing. Curious, Margaret approached the scene. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a calm demeanor that immediately put the boy at ease. "You'll be fine," he said, wrapping the wound with a clean cloth. "Just keep it clean, and it will heal in no time." When he stood up, his eyes met Margaret's, and he smiled. "I'm Peter," he said, extending a hand. "I'm the new doctor in the village." Margaret felt her heart skip a beat. Could this be the Peter the Prophet had spoken of? He was certainly impressive. Over the next few days, she found herself thinking about him often. He was intelligent, kind, and dedicated to his work. But something about him felt distant. Though he was polite and charming, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that his heart was elsewhere. Still, she decided to keep an open mind. After all, the Prophet had said her husband's name would be Peter, and this Peter seemed like a strong contender. The village square was bustling with activity as Margaret made her way to the community gathering. It was an event held every month, where villagers came together to discuss issues, share ideas, and celebrate their culture. Margaret loved these gatherings, not just for the lively atmosphere, but also for the chance to connect with her community. That day, as she listened to the village chief speak, her attention was drawn to a man standing near the front of the crowd. He was tall and lean, with a quiet intensity that set him apart from the others. When the chief finished speaking, the man stepped forward to address the crowd. "My name is Peter," he began, his voice steady and confident. "I am a teacher, and I believe that education is the key to our future. I dream of building a school here in Ojusiri, a place where our children can learn and grow." Margaret was captivated. His words were filled with passion and purpose, and she could see the fire in his eyes as he spoke. After the gathering, she approached him to introduce herself. They talked for hours, discussing his vision for the school and her own dreams for the future. Peter the teacher was thoughtful and intelligent, and Margaret found herself drawn to his idealism. But as their conversation deepened, she noticed a shadow in his eyes, as if he carried a burden he wasn't ready to share. She wondered if his passion for his work might leave little room for anything else, including a relationship. A week later, Margaret attended a trade fair in a neighboring village. The event was a vibrant display of goods and talents, with traders from all over the region showcasing their wares. As she wandered through the stalls, admiring the colorful fabrics and handcrafted jewelry, she heard a booming voice behind her. "Ah, you have an eye for quality." Turning around, she found herself face to face with a man who exuded confidence and charm. "I'm Peter," he said with a grin, extending his hand. "And you must be Margaret. I've heard about you. Your weaving is famous even beyond this village." Margaret was taken aback. "You've heard of me?" she asked, surprised. "Of course," he replied. "I make it my business to know the best artisans in the region. Perhaps we can work together. I could help you expand your trade." Peter the businessman was unlike anyone Margaret had ever met. He was ambitious and driven, with a natural charisma that drew people to him. Over the course of the day, he introduced her to traders and shared his ideas for growing her weaving business. Margaret was impressed by his vision and his ability to turn ideas into reality. But as much as she admired his determination, she couldn't help but wonder if his love for success might overshadow his ability to truly connect with her on a deeper level. Margaret's friend, Helen, had always been a lover of art. So, when she invited Margaret to visit a small gallery in the neighboring village, Margaret agreed, curious to see what the fuss was about. The gallery was a modest space, filled with vibrant paintings and intricate sculptures that seemed to tell stories of their own. As Margaret admired a painting of a woman weaving under a baobab tree, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "You like it?" the man asked. He was tall and slender, with paint-stained hands and a warm smile. "I call it the Weaver's Song." Margaret turned to face him, intrigued. "It's beautiful," she said. "It feels alive." The man chuckled. "That's the goal. I'm Peter, by the way. I'm the artist." Peter the artist was unlike anyone Margaret had ever met. He spoke with a poetic rhythm, his words painting pictures as vivid as his art. Over the next few hours, he showed her his work, explaining the inspiration behind each piece. Margaret was enchanted by his creativity and sensitivity. He saw beauty in the smallest details, and his passion for his craft was infectious. But as much as she admired him, Margaret couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Peter's world was one of dreams and imagination, while hers was rooted in practicality and tradition. Could their lives truly align? Or would their differences pull them apart? These questions lingered in her mind as she left the gallery, unsure of what to make of this Peter. A few days later, Margaret traveled to her uncle's farm to deliver some supplies. The farm was a sprawling expanse of green, with rows of maize and cassava stretching as far as the eye could see. As she approached the main house, she noticed a man working in the fields. He was shirtless, his skin glistening with sweat as he hoisted a sack of yams onto his shoulder. When he saw her, he waved and walked over, a friendly smile on his face. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice deep and steady. "You must be Margaret. Your uncle has told me a lot about you." "I'm Peter, one of the farmers here." Margaret smiled back, impressed by his strength and humility. "It's nice to meet you, Peter," she said. "You seem to work very hard." Peter the farmer was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. Over the course of the day, Margaret watched as he tended to the crops, helped an elderly worker carry a heavy load, and even fixed a broken fence. He was hardworking, humble, and deeply connected to the land. Margaret admired his dedication and his simple, honest way of life. As they talked, she learned that Peter had inherited his love for farming from his father, who had taught him to respect the earth and its gifts. "The land provides for us," he said, "but only if we care for it in return." His words resonated with Margaret, and she found herself drawn to his grounded nature. But at the same time, she wondered if their lives were too different. Could she, a weaver with dreams of expanding her craft, truly find happiness with someone whose world revolved around the soil? Margaret sat under the shade of the old baobab tree in her family's compound, her thoughts swirling like the wind that rustled the leaves above her. She had met all 5 Peters, and each of them had left a mark on her heart in different ways. Peter the doctor was intelligent and kind, but his heart seemed distant, as though his work consumed him entirely. Peter the teacher was passionate and inspiring, but there was a heaviness in his soul that he had yet to share. Peter the businessman was ambitious and charismatic, but Margaret wondered if his love for success might overshadow his ability to truly love her. Then there was Peter the artist, whose creativity and sensitivity had enchanted her, but his free-spirited nature made her question whether he could provide the stability she desired. And finally, Peter the farmer, whose humility and connection to the land had deeply impressed her, but she worried that their lives might be too different to truly align. Margaret sighed, her heart heavy with confusion. Each Peter had qualities she admired, but none of them felt like the perfect fit. She thought back to the prophet's words, "Your husband's name shall be Peter, and your union will bring forth joy that will echo through generations." How could she know which Peter was the one destined for her? She decided that she needed more time with each of them. Only by truly understanding their hearts could she hope to find the one who was meant to be her partner. The next morning, Margaret woke with a sense of determination. She would visit Prophet Alexzander again and seek his guidance. Surely, he could help her make sense of her feelings and point her toward the right Peter. She wrapped her scarf tightly around her head and set off toward the prophet's compound, her heart filled with hope. But when she arrived, she was met with devastating news. The prophet had passed away the night before, his spirit returning to the ancestors in the quiet hours of the night. The villagers were gathered around his compound, mourning the loss of the man who had guided them for so many years. Margaret felt her knees weaken as the weight of the news sank in. The one person who could have helped her was gone. Tears filled her eyes as she knelt before the prophet's empty stool, her heart heavy with grief. "What do I do now?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "How can I find the right Peter without your guidance?" But as she sat there in silence, a memory of the prophet's words came to her mind. "Trust your heart, Margaret. The spirits have shown me your path, but it is you who must walk it." In that moment, Margaret realized that the answer would not come from anyone else, not even the prophet. She would have to trust herself and the lessons she had learned from her journey so far. Wiping her tears, she stood and made a silent vow. She would spend time with each Peter, testing their character and learning more about their hearts. Only then would she be able to make her choice. Margaret sat in her room that evening, her mind racing with ideas. She had decided to take matters into her own hands. If she was to find the right Peter, she needed to truly understand their hearts. The prophet's words had been clear. Her husband's name would be Peter, but it was up to her to choose wisely. She couldn't rely on fate alone. She had to test their character, their values, and their intentions. She devised a plan. Over the next few weeks, she would spend time with each Peter individually, observing how they handled challenges and how they treated others. She would create situations to test their kindness, patience, honesty, and capacity for love. It wasn't just about finding the man who was right for her. It was about finding the man who would be a true partner, someone who would walk beside her through life's joys and struggles. The next morning, Margaret set her plan into motion. She sent word to each Peter, inviting them to spend time with her in different settings. She didn't tell them about her tests, of course. She wanted to see their true selves, unfiltered and unguarded. As she prepared for the days ahead, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This journey was about more than just finding a husband. It was about discovering what she truly wanted in a partner. Margaret's first test was one of kindness. She wanted to see how each Peter would respond to someone in need. To do this, she enlisted the help of her friend Helen, who agreed to play the role of a struggling villager. Helen would approach each Peter, pretending to be in desperate need of help, and Margaret would observe their reactions from a distance. The first to be tested was Peter the doctor. Helen approached him as he was leaving the clinic, clutching her stomach and pretending to be in pain. "Please, sir," she said, her voice trembling. "I have no money, but I need help. My stomach has been hurting for days." Peter the doctor immediately stopped and examined her with concern. "Come inside," he said, leading her back into the clinic. "I'll take a look at you, and don't worry about the money. Your health is more important." Margaret watched from afar, her heart warming at his selflessness. Next was Peter the teacher. Helen found him at the village square, where he was talking to a group of children. She approached him, explaining that she couldn't afford to buy food for her family. Peter the teacher listened intently, then reached into his bag and handed her a small bundle of coins. "This is all I have right now," he said, "but I hope it helps. If you need more, come find me later." Margaret smiled, impressed by his generosity. Peter the businessman's reaction, however, was less encouraging. When Helen approached him at the market, he frowned and shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I can't help you. I have my own responsibilities to take care of." Margaret felt a pang of disappointment. She had hoped for more from him, but his response revealed a side of him she hadn't seen before. Peter the artist surprised her. When Helen approached him at his gallery, he immediately stopped what he was doing and offered her a seat. "I don't have much," he said, "but I can give you some food and water. And if you need a place to rest, you're welcome to stay here for a while." Margaret was touched by his kindness and his willingness to help, even though he had little to give. Finally, there was Peter the farmer. Helen found him working in the fields and explained her situation. Without hesitation, he handed her a basket of yams and said, "Take these. They'll feed your family for a few days. If you need more, come back and I'll help you again." Margaret watched from a distance, her heart swelling with admiration for his generosity and humility. By the end of the day, Margaret had learned a great deal about each Peter. Some had shown remarkable kindness, while others had revealed unexpected flaws. She knew that this was only the beginning of her journey, but she felt a renewed sense of clarity. The right Peter would not only love her, but also embody the values she held dear. Margaret's next test was one of patience. She wanted to see how each Peter handled frustration and unexpected challenges. To do this, she created small, harmless situations that would test their ability to remain calm and composed under pressure. The first test was with Peter the doctor. Margaret invited him to her family's compound for a meal, but she deliberately delayed serving the food. As the minutes turned into an hour, she watched his reaction closely. At first, Peter the doctor was polite, making small talk and asking about her day. But as the delay stretched on, he began to fidget, checking his watch and glancing toward the kitchen. "Is everything all right?" he finally asked, his tone strained. Margaret smiled and assured him that the food was almost ready. While he didn't lose his temper, it was clear that his patience had limits. Next was Peter the teacher. Margaret invited him to help her with a weaving project, but she intentionally made mistakes, forcing him to redo the work several times. To her surprise, Peter the teacher remained calm and encouraging throughout the process. "It's all right," he said with a smile. "Mistakes are part of learning. We'll get it right together." Margaret was impressed by his ability to stay patient and supportive, even when things didn't go as planned. Peter the businessman, however, was a different story. Margaret asked him to accompany her to the market, where she pretended to take an unusually long time selecting items. At first, Peter tried to hide his frustration, but eventually, he sighed loudly and said, "Margaret, we've been here for over an hour. Can't you just pick something and move on?" His impatience was evident, and Margaret couldn't help but feel disappointed. Peter the artist surprised her once again. She invited him to paint a portrait of her, but she kept moving and changing her position, making it difficult for him to work. Instead of getting frustrated, Peter laughed and said, "You're making this a challenge, but I like challenges. It keeps things interesting." His light-hearted attitude and ability to adapt impressed Margaret, and she found herself smiling at his resilience. Finally, there was Peter the farmer. Margaret visited him at the farm and asked for his help with a task, but she deliberately gave him unclear instructions, causing confusion. Peter the farmer paused, took a deep breath, and said, "Margaret, let's take a moment to figure this out together. There's no need to rush." His calm demeanor and willingness to work through the problem with her left a lasting impression. By the end of the day, Margaret had learned even more about each Peter. Some had shown remarkable patience, while others had revealed a tendency to become frustrated under pressure. She knew that patience was an important quality in a partner, and her observations brought her one step closer to making her decision. Margaret's next test was one of honesty. She wanted to see how open and truthful each Peter was about their past, their dreams, and their intentions. To do this, she invited each of them to spend time with her and asked them a series of personal questions. Peter the doctor was the first. As they walked through the village, Margaret asked him about his childhood and his reasons for becoming a doctor. Peter spoke openly about his struggles growing up in a poor family and his desire to help others. "I've seen too many people suffer because they couldn't afford medical care," he said. "That's why I became a doctor, to make a difference." Margaret was moved by his sincerity, but when she asked about his plans for the future, he hesitated. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "My work keeps me so busy that I haven't thought much about anything else." His honesty was refreshing, but it also left Margaret wondering if he was ready for a committed relationship. Peter the teacher was next. As they sat under the shade of a tree, Margaret asked him about his dreams for the future. Peter spoke passionately about his vision for the school he wanted to build. "Education is the key to breaking the cycle of poverty," he said. "I want to give every child in this village a chance to succeed." When Margaret asked about his personal life, Peter grew quiet. "I've always been so focused on my work that I haven't made much time for anything else," he admitted. "But I'm ready to change that." His honesty and willingness to grow impressed Margaret, but she wondered if his work would always come first. Peter the businessman, however, was less forthcoming. When Margaret asked about his past, he gave vague answers, avoiding details. "I've worked hard to get where I am," he said, "and that's all that matters." When she asked about his intentions for the future, he smiled and said, "I want to keep building my business and enjoy life." While his ambition was admirable, his lack of openness left Margaret feeling uneasy. Peter the artist, on the other hand, was an open book. As they walked through the gallery, he shared stories about his childhood, his struggles as an artist, and his dreams of one day creating a masterpiece that would inspire others. "Art is my way of connecting with the world," he said. "It's how I express what's in my heart." When Margaret asked about his intentions for their relationship, Peter smiled and said, "I want to build something beautiful with you, just like I do with my art." His honesty and vulnerability touched Margaret deeply. Finally, there was Peter the farmer. As they worked together in the fields, Margaret asked him about his life and his dreams. Peter spoke openly about his love for farming and his desire to one day own his own land. "I want to build a life that's simple but meaningful," he said. "A life where I can provide for my family and give back to the community." When Margaret asked about his intentions for their relationship, Peter looked her in the eye and said, "I want to build a future with you, Margaret. A future that's rooted in love and respect." His words were simple but heartfelt, and they stayed with Margaret long after their conversation ended. Margaret knew that love was more than words. It was action, care, and the way someone treated not just their partner but the people around them. For her next test, she decided to observe how each Peter expressed love, not just for her, but for their families, friends, and community. She began with Peter the doctor. Margaret joined him at the clinic, where she watched him interact with his patients. He was gentle and attentive, taking the time to listen to their concerns and reassure them. When a young boy came in with a fever, Peter knelt down to his level and spoke to him softly, making him laugh despite his discomfort. Margaret was touched by his compassion, but she noticed that his focus was entirely on his work. While he clearly cared deeply for his patients, she wondered if he had the capacity to balance his love for his work with his love for a partner. Next was Peter the teacher. Margaret visited him at the small school where he taught. The children adored him, and it was easy to see why. He was patient and encouraging, always finding ways to make learning fun. When one of the children struggled with a math problem, Peter sat beside him and worked through it step by step, never losing his smile. Margaret admired his dedication, but she couldn't help but notice that his love for teaching seemed to consume him. Would there be room in his life for her? Peter the businessman invited Margaret to a community event he had sponsored. He was generous, donating money to help repair the village well and providing food for the attendees. But as Margaret watched him interact with the villagers, she noticed that his gestures, while kind, seemed more about maintaining his reputation than genuine care. When he spoke to her, his words were charming, but they lacked the depth she was looking for. Margaret began to feel that his love was more about appearances than true connection. Peter the artist, on the other hand, wore his heart on his sleeve. He invited Margaret to his studio, where he showed her a painting he had been working on. It was a portrait of her, surrounded by vibrant colors that seemed to capture her spirit. "This is how I see you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Margaret was deeply moved by his ability to express his feelings through his art, but she wondered if his love for her was more of an idealized vision than a grounded reality. Finally, there was Peter the farmer. Margaret spent the day with him on the farm, where she saw how he cared for the land, his workers, and his family. When one of the workers injured his hand, Peter immediately stopped what he was doing to help, bandaging the wound and offering words of comfort. Later, he invited Margaret to join his family for dinner, where he spoke lovingly about his parents and siblings. Margaret felt a warmth in his presence, a sense of stability and genuine care that resonated deeply with her. By the end of the day, Margaret had seen how each Peter expressed love in their own way. Some had shown great passion, while others had revealed unexpected flaws. She felt closer to making her decision, but doubt still lingered in her heart. As the days passed, Margaret found herself growing more anxious. She had spent weeks getting to know each Peter, testing their character and observing their actions. Yet, she still couldn't shake the fear that she might choose the wrong one. What if the prophet's words had been wrong? What if none of the Peters were truly meant for her? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Margaret sat with her parents in their compound. Her mother, sensing her distress, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "What troubles you, my daughter?" she asked gently. Margaret sighed, her voice heavy with uncertainty. "I've met 5 men, all named Peter, and each of them has qualities I admire. But none of them feel perfect. What if I make the wrong choice? What if I'm not meant to find the Peter the prophet spoke of?" Her father, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Margaret, no one is perfect. Love is not about finding someone without flaws. It's about finding someone whose strengths and weaknesses complement your own. The right partner will not be perfect, but they will be perfect for you." His words struck a chord in Margaret's heart. She realized that she had been searching for an ideal, someone who checked every box on her list. But love wasn't about perfection. It was about connection, trust, and the ability to grow together. She thought back to her time with each Peter, reflecting on the moments that had touched her heart and the lessons she had learned. That night, as she lay in bed, Margaret felt a sense of clarity begin to emerge. She didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew she was closer to finding the Peter who was truly meant for her. The days passed, and Margaret continued to reflect on her journey. She had spent time with each Peter, learning about their strengths, weaknesses, and how they expressed love. Yet, despite all her efforts, she still felt torn. Each Peter had qualities she admired, but none of them seemed to stand out as the one destined for her. She prayed for clarity, hoping that the answer would reveal itself in time. One afternoon, as she walked through the village, she came across a commotion near the market. A cart carrying sacks of grain had overturned, spilling its contents onto the road. The owner, an elderly man, was struggling to lift the heavy sacks back onto the cart. A small crowd had gathered, but no one seemed willing to help. Margaret watched as Peter the businessman walked by, glancing at the scene before continuing on his way. Peter the doctor was nearby, but he was busy speaking with a patient and didn't notice the commotion. Peter the teacher arrived shortly after and offered to help, but his frail frame made it difficult for him to lift the heavy sacks. Peter the artist stood at a distance, sketching the scene in his notebook but making no move to assist. Then, Peter the farmer appeared. Without hesitation, he rolled up his sleeves and began lifting the sacks back onto the cart. His movements were steady and efficient, and he worked tirelessly until the cart was fully loaded. When the elderly man thanked him, Peter simply smiled and said, "It's nothing. We all need a little help sometimes." Margaret felt her heart stir as she watched him. In that moment, she realized what set Peter the farmer apart from the others. He didn't just talk about kindness or love, he lived it. His actions spoke louder than words, and his humility and selflessness resonated deeply with her. She thought back to all the moments they had shared, from his calm patience during her tests to the way he cared for his family and community. It was clear to her now, Peter the farmer was the one. The next morning, Margaret woke with a sense of certainty she hadn't felt in weeks. She knew what she had to do. She sent word to all 5 Peters, asking them to meet her at the village square that evening. The sun was setting as they gathered, the golden light casting long shadows across the ground. The villagers, curious about the outcome of Margaret's journey, began to gather as well, forming a quiet circle around the group. Margaret stood before the 5 men, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "Each of you has shown me something unique and valuable," she said, her voice steady. "Peter the doctor, your compassion and dedication to your work are inspiring. Peter the teacher, your passion for education and your patience have touched my heart. Peter the businessman, your ambition and generosity are admirable. Peter the artist, your creativity and sensitivity have shown me a new way of seeing the world." She paused, her eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "But there is one among you who has shown me not just words, but actions. Someone who has demonstrated kindness, humility, and a deep understanding of what it means to love and care for others. That person is Peter the farmer." The crowd murmured in approval as Peter the farmer stepped forward, his eyes wide with surprise and joy. "Margaret," he said, his voice trembling, "are you sure?" Margaret smiled, her heart full. "Yes, Peter. You are the one the prophet spoke of. You are the one I choose." The other Peters nodded in acceptance, their expressions a mix of disappointment and understanding. "You've made a wise choice, Margaret," Peter the teacher said with a kind smile. "We wish you both happiness." As the villagers erupted into cheers, Peter the farmer took Margaret's hands in his. "I promise to love and cherish you, Margaret," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Together, we will build a life rooted in love and respect." Margaret felt a sense of peace wash over her. For the first time in weeks, she knew she had made the right decision. The journey had been long and challenging, but it had led her to the man who was truly meant for her. The days following Margaret's decision were filled with excitement and activity. News of her choice spread quickly through the village, and everyone was eager to help prepare for the wedding. It wasn't just a union between Margaret and Peter the farmer. It was a celebration of love, community, and the journey that had brought them together. Margaret's family took charge of the preparations, with her mother overseeing the cooking and her father organizing the seating arrangements. The women of the village gathered to weave colorful fabrics for the ceremony, while the men helped Peter prepare his farm for the celebration. The wedding would take place in the open fields, surrounded by the land that Peter loved so dearly. Margaret spent her days helping where she could, but she also took time to reflect on her journey. She thought about the lessons she had learned from each Peter, the compassion of the doctor, the patience of the teacher, the ambition of the businessman, and the creativity of the artist. Each of them had taught her something valuable, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the experiences that had shaped her. One afternoon, as Margaret was helping her mother prepare a batch of yam porridge, Peter the farmer arrived at her family's compound. He carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth, which he handed to Margaret with a shy smile. "I made this for you," he said. Margaret unwrapped the bundle to find a beautifully carved wooden box. Inside was a simple but elegant necklace made of polished stones. "I found these stones on the farm," Peter explained. "They reminded me of you. Strong, beautiful, and full of life." Margaret's heart swelled with emotion. "Thank you, Peter," she said, her voice soft. "It's perfect." As the wedding day drew closer, Margaret felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She knew she had made the right choice, but the weight of the moment still felt overwhelming. Her mother noticed her unease and pulled her aside one evening. "Margaret," she said gently, "love is not about perfection. It's about choosing someone who will stand by your side, through the good times and the bad. Peter is that person for you. Trust in your heart, and everything will be fine." Her mother's words gave Margaret the reassurance she needed. She went to bed that night feeling at peace, ready to embrace the next chapter of her life. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the sky painted in shades of gold and blue. The entire village gathered at Peter's farm, which had been transformed into a beautiful venue for the ceremony. Flowers adorned the archway where Margaret and Peter would exchange their vows, and colorful fabrics fluttered in the gentle breeze. Margaret's heart raced as she prepared for the ceremony. Her friends helped her dress in a stunning gown made from the fabrics woven by the village women. The gown was a vibrant mix of red, gold, and green, symbolizing love, prosperity, and growth. Her hair was adorned with delicate beads, and the necklace Peter had given her rested against her chest. When the time came, Margaret stepped out into the field, her father by her side. The villagers gasped in admiration as she walked down the aisle, her beauty radiating like the sun. Peter stood at the end of the aisle, his eyes filled with love and awe as he watched her approach. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. The village elder, a wise and kind woman named Margaret, officiated the wedding. She spoke of the importance of love, trust, and partnership, reminding Margaret and Peter that their union was not just about them, but also about the community they were a part of. When it was time for the vows, Peter took Margaret's hands in his and spoke from the heart. "Margaret, you are my light, my strength, and my greatest blessing. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand by your side, no matter what life brings." Tears filled Margaret's eyes as she responded, "Peter, you are my rock, my partner, and my home. I promise to love you, support you, and build a life with you that is full of love and purpose." As they exchanged rings, the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. The ceremony ended with a traditional dance, where Margaret and Peter were joined by their families and friends in a joyous celebration. The music, laughter, and love filled the air, creating memories that would last a lifetime. That evening, as the sun set over the fields, Margaret and Peter sat together, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. "This is just the beginning," Peter said, his voice filled with hope. "Our journey is only starting." Margaret smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And I wouldn't want to walk it with anyone else." The days after the wedding were filled with quiet joy as Margaret and Peter began their life together. The farm, which had always been Peter's pride, now became their shared home. Margaret quickly adapted to the rhythm of farm life, waking early to help Peter tend to the crops and care for the animals. Though the work was hard, it was fulfilling, and she found peace in the simplicity of their days. Peter, ever attentive, made sure that Margaret felt supported in their new life. He often surprised her with small gestures, flowers he picked from the fields, a carved trinket he made in his spare time, or a quiet moment together under the stars. Margaret, in turn, brought warmth and laughter to their home, filling it with her vibrant spirit. Together, they built a partnership rooted in love, respect, and shared dreams. As the months passed, Margaret found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought about the other Peters and the lessons they had taught her. Peter the doctor had shown her the importance of compassion and dedication. Peter the teacher had taught her patience and the value of education. Peter the businessman had reminded her of the power of ambition and generosity, while Peter the artist had opened her eyes to the beauty of creativity and vulnerability. Though she had chosen Peter the farmer, she remained grateful for the experiences she had shared with each of the others. They had all played a role in shaping her understanding of love and what she truly wanted in a partner. In the end, it wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone who complemented her, someone who shared her values and dreams. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Margaret and Peter sat together on the porch of their home. The fields stretched out before them, bathed in the golden light of dusk. Margaret rested her head on Peter's shoulder, a contented smile on her face. "Do you ever think about the prophecy?" Peter asked, his voice soft. Margaret nodded. "I do. At first, I thought it was about finding someone who fit a perfect image. But now I realize it was about finding someone who felt right in my heart. The prophet's words guided me, but it was the journey that truly led me to you." Peter smiled, his hand gently squeezing hers. "I'm glad you chose me, Margaret. I promise to always cherish you and the life we are building together." Their life together wasn't without challenges, but they faced each one as a team. When the rains came late one season, threatening their crops, they worked tirelessly to save what they could. When Margaret's parents fell ill, Peter was by her side, offering support and comfort. And when they welcomed their first child, a bright-eyed boy they named Kelechi, meaning thank God, their love deepened in ways they hadn't imagined. Margaret and Peter also became pillars of their community. They started a small initiative to teach young villagers sustainable farming techniques, ensuring that the land would continue to thrive for generations to come. Margaret, with her natural leadership and warmth, became a mentor to many young women in the village, sharing her story and encouraging them to trust their hearts and embrace the lessons life offered. Years later, as Margaret sat with a group of young women under the shade of a baobab tree, she recounted her journey. The women listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder as she spoke of the 5 Peters and the tests she had created to find the one who was truly meant for her. "What I learned," Margaret said, her voice steady and full of wisdom, "is that love is not about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who sees you, who values you, and who is willing to grow with you. Trust your heart, and don't be afraid to take the journey. It will lead you where you're meant to be." As the young women thanked her and left, Margaret watched them go with a smile. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that her story had become a source of inspiration for others. Her journey had not only brought her love but also a purpose, to guide others toward their own paths of self-discovery and happiness. That evening, as she and Peter sat together under the stars, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. Her life was not perfect, but it was hers, and it was beautiful. She had found her Peter, her partner, and her home. And so, Margaret's story became a legend in the village, a tale of love, faith, and the power of following one's heart. It was a story that would be told for generations, reminding everyone that the journey to love is as important as the destination. The end.